Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Hit the bell icon button so that you don't miss out any tutorial.
In this video, we're going to take a look at Docker, and we're going to go ahead and practice installing Docker on our systems. So once again, as we talked about in our last video, Docker is going to be the containerization engine that we want to use. And essentially Kubernetes uses Docker as well. So it's important that we install Docker on our local machine so we're able to run containers locally. And this will also aid us in building containers and testing things work properly before setting up a Kubernetes environment. So you can get Docker from www.docker.com. And once again, I mentioned this in one of the earlier videos. Docker is kind of the standard for containerization. There are other containerization platforms, but Docker is the most popular. Kubernetes uses Docker, and so that's why it's important that we learn more about Docker. And Docker is available on Windows. It's also available on Mac OS and Linux. And in this video, we're going to cover the installation on Linux. And then in the next video, we'll cover the installation on Windows. So if you're using a Windows machine, I recommend you skip the rest of this video and go to our next video. And if you're using a Linux machine, continue following ahead. And also, if you're using a OS X or Mac machine, the installation on Windows will be the same process on OS X. Anyways, with that, let's get started. So you can go to docs.docker.com, and there will actually be a great how-to guide on how to install Docker on whatever your operating system is. For me, I'm running Ubuntu Linux, and so I have a previous version of Docker actually installed. Oops. So I'm going to go ahead and uninstall the old version by using this command. Okay, now let's run. And this should just remove the old version of Docker I'm running. I'm actually running a newer version than the one they reference here in the guide, and so the name of the package is Docker CE. So we'll just go ahead and remove that. I was running 1806, and I believe the current version here is let's see. Let's just go ahead and install it. Should tell us what version there is. So the first things we need to do on Linux is we need to update our aptitude repository, and then we'll have to install the Docker repository. And this is great. If you're familiar with Linux and how repositories work, it's great that we use the Docker repository so we can get all the updates with Docker, because it's such a new technology. And they're constantly releasing small new versions of Docker that have a lot of new features. So it's the best way to stay up to date. Excuse me. Okay, let's go ahead and update our repositories. And as you can see here, I do have the Docker repository already installed because I already had Docker installed. But for the sake of this video, we'll go ahead and step through the entire process in case you don't already have Docker installed. So now we want to install packages. that we'll need to get to install the Docker repository. So let's go ahead and copy this. And I know I already have all these installed, but just for the sake of the video. Oh, I don't have app transport HTTPS. I thought I did. Okay, that's done. Now let's get the GPG key for Docker. Okay, that is done. So let's verify we have the right GPG key. This is just a security measure. You don't have to do this, but it's a good practice. And does that look like what we have here? It does. Okay, so let's move right along. Let's go ahead and install the repo. Depending on your architecture, you'll want to click on the appropriate tab here. But I imagine most of you guys will be running an AMD 64 processor or x86 64. So let's go ahead and copy this repository and install it. It might complain that it's already installed. All right, and let's run another apt update to update the package index to make sure our package installer can find the latest version of the packaged Docker. All right, and now we're ready to install the Docker community version. Go ahead and say yes and install this package. Okay, and I was just taking a look at this. This is important to note. If you have multiple Docker repositories enabled, installing and updating without specifying a version, and the apt-get install or apt-get update commands always installs the highest possible version, which is what we want. And yeah, for the sake of this video and its entire course, we want to make sure we're running the latest version of Docker. All right, so Docker's been installed and the service is started. And also, if you're running Linux, another tool we're going to need is Docker Compose. I already have this installed, but let's see if there's a later version. Nope, I'm running the latest version, so that's great. So that completes the installation of Docker on Ubuntu. Like I said, in the next video, I'm going to cover the installation process for Windows and OS X. So if you followed along till here, I imagine you are running Linux or Ubuntu. And if you're not running Ubuntu, as I said here on docs.docker.com, there is a very similar tutorial for all the other distributions or all the other major distributions of Linux. It's pretty straightforward. It's not too difficult, and this tutorial is really good. In this video, we're going to cover the installation of the Docker desktop application as well as the Kubernetes CLI application, followed by the Minikube application on a Windows-based computer. So if you're running the Mac operating system or a Linux operating system, you feel free to skip this video because these steps are only going to apply to Windows. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and download Docker. Open your favorite web browser on your desktop here, and I want you to search for installing Docker on Windows. It will essentially bring you to that same page we're just looking at. Scroll down, install Docker for Windows. On this page here, what you can do is you can read through these warnings if you like, and you can check out the system requirements. Make sure you have at least 4 gigabytes of RAM. Anyways, go ahead and scroll down to where it says install Docker Desktop on Windows, and you want to click this download link here. It's download.docker.com. Click that. It's 541 megabytes. Go ahead and do save. I'm actually already have it downloaded, but we'll go ahead and download it anyways for fun. While that happens, you want to search for installing Kubernetes on Windows. And it'll basically bring you to that same page I was already at. But install and set up Kubernetes. And on this page you see install with Chocolatey on Windows. This is going to require us to install the Chocolatey package manager. It's a very interesting package manager for Windows. It makes it easy to install a lot of the command line applications we're going to need. And so let's go ahead and download Chocolatey. This will bring us to the Chocolatey website. Go ahead and click install Chocolatey now. And when it comes to installing Chocolatey, there's 2 ways you can do it. One is use the command prompt and you copy and paste this long one-liner here, which is what we'll do. And the other way is to use the PowerShell and you basically do something very similar. But since we're going to use the command prompt, let's go ahead and open up our command prompt. Make sure you run it as an administrator. Go ahead and say yes to the warnings. Paste that and click enter, and this will install Chocolatey. It's usually very quick. It doesn't take very long at all. And as you can see, it detected that I already have Chocolatey installed, but nevertheless, let's move on. So now that Docker has finished downloading, let's go ahead and start the installation process of Docker. Go ahead and say yes to your warnings here. It will download the package and then it will start installing. Make sure you click add shortcut to desktop. Also, something it's worth mentioning is I said in an earlier video that when you run Docker, the containers or the operating system that your containers are based on has to use the same kernel as the host operating system. So you wouldn't be able to run like Windows containers on your Linux server, or you wouldn't be able to run Linux containers on Windows. The cool thing about Docker Desktop for Windows is it actually creates a Linux virtual machine that it runs your containers off of. So it allows you to run containers that are based on the Linux kernel. And something that's cool about the latest version of Docker Desktop, you can choose to run Windows containers instead and use the Windows kernel instead of installing the Linux virtual machine. So the containers have access to that kernel. So anyways, with that said, for the focus of this course, we're going to focus on Linux containers. So make sure you leave this box unchecked. Go ahead and click OK. and this process might take a few minutes. And so I'm going to open the PowerShell now so we can play with Chocolatey. Make sure you open the PowerShell and run as administrator. Click yes, click yes. I accidentally opened it twice. Okay, now let's install the Kubernetes CLI tool as well as Minikube. So the command to do that is choco, and that's the package manager we just installed. Install, and the first one's going to be Kubernetes CLI. And just in case you have problems remembering that, on the web page that we opened up for the installation of Kubernetes, it has some easy copy and paste for you here. So essentially, choco install Kubernetes CLI. And also, we want to install Minikube. So you can say install choco install Kubernetes CLI, and then add Minikube to the end of that. And go ahead and press enter. And what it will do, it will download all the necessary packages, and we'll go ahead and configure everything for you. As you see, I already installed the Kubernetes CLI, but I have not installed Minikube. So now the process is starting to install Minikube. All right, great. And so we can test if Chocolatey installed Kubernetes properly. So just do kubectl version, and you see it returned the client version here. And since we're not connected to a Kubernetes cluster yet, it's unable to connect to the server and tell us what the server's version of Kubernetes is. We can also do a Minikube version, and we see what the Minikube version is here. So both those packages were installed successfully, and our Docker desktop was installed successfully. So now if you're on a Windows machine and you follow these steps accurately, you're ready to go and start playing with Kubernetes containers. So that's going to be it for this video. In this video, we're going to cover the installation of the Docker desktop application, the Kubernetes CLI tool, and the Minikube application on the OS X or Mac operating system. So if you're using Windows or Linux, feel free to skip this video. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, what you're going to want to do is Google install Docker Mac. This will take us to the installation page for Docker. And you see where it says install Docker desktop for Mac. It's going to say download from Docker Hub. And if you don't already have an account for Docker Hub, now is where you should create one. This is going to be where it's like a repository for containers. I believe we spoke of this a little bit in one of the previous videos. Go ahead and sign in if you have an account. Otherwise, go ahead and sign up. And once you're logged in, you'll be able to download Docker Desktop for Mac. So let me just log in here. Go ahead and download. And while that's downloading, let's go ahead and look at installing the Kubernetes CLI tool. Alright, now so we're on the Kubernetes page. All you have to do is Google install Kubernetes CLI Mac, and it'll bring you to the install and set up Kubernetes or kubectl page. And go to where it says install with Homebrew on Mac OS. what we're going to need to do here is install the Homebrew package manager. And Homebrew is a tool for installing a lot of the command line applications, and it's going to really aid us in what we're working on right now. So with that said, let's go ahead and install Homebrew. So go ahead and open a new tab and search for Homebrew Mac, and it'll be this first link. And in order to install, you just copy this one-liner here, and then you can open the terminal and paste that. I've actually already installed this. Oops, sorry. It didn't copy properly. I've already installed Homebrew, but I'm just going to walk you through this process. So it's a script like this. You paste the one-liner into your terminal, and you follow the steps. You basically just hit enter, and it'll go ahead and install and set up Homebrew. It's actually very straightforward. I'm gonna walk you through it now. It'll take just a few minutes. And it's ready to go. And so now that we have Homebrew installed, what we can do is we can type brew to, and that's the command for the package manager. So brew, just to verify it installed properly. We see that it showed the help menu for Homebrew. So now we can do brew install, and if we look back at the documentation, it's brew install Kubernetes Cli. And we also want to install Minikube as well. So let me pull up the documentation for installing Minikube. Just Google install Minikube Mac. And I believe we'll install it with Homebrew as well. Yep, so same thing. So let's go ahead and do brew install Kubernetes CLI. And that was quick. It already went ahead and installed the Kubernetes CLI tool, which is called kubectl. So we can type kubectl version just to verify it got installed properly. And you can see it says the client version here, and then it's not able to connect to the actual Kubernetes server because we haven't configured it yet. So now let's do brew CASK install Minikube, and this will go ahead and install Minikube for us. Take it just a moment. Alright, now Minikube was installed successfully. So we can do Minikube just space version, and we see we have a Minikube version of 0.33.1. So now let's go ahead and find our Docker executable that we downloaded earlier before we installed the package manager and Minikube and the Kubernetes CLI. And simply do the drag and drop to applications. Alright, now let's go ahead to, let's open our Finder window and go to Applications, and let's find Docker. And here it is. Go ahead and double click that. Let it go through this verifying process. Go ahead and say OK to this. The Docker executable is OK to run. And now let's follow the steps for the installation. Go ahead and type your administrator password here. And now Docker is installed and it's starting. And when you see the well with this animation above it, that's Docker starting and then running. And here it's asking us to log into Docker Hub. So if you remember when we created that account, you could enter your information here. Alright, the Docker desktop is now up and running. Cool. And we can do a Docker version as well here in the command line to verify it was installed properly. Okay, so that's going to be it for this video. You are now officially up and running with your Kubernetes CLI tool, Docker desktop, and Minikube installed on your Mac operating system.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.